Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. A Ukrainian delegation heads to the US for talks on security guarantees and a post-war recovery package. President Zelensky says Kyiv needs up to $800 billion and hopes to sign key documents at Davos. The White House announces a US-led Board of Peace to oversee temporary governance in Gaza as deadly violence continues despite a fragile ceasefire. The board includes Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, with President Trump serving as chair. Residents say Iran's deadly crackdown has largely quelled protests as state media reports more arrests. President Trump claims Iran halts planned executions, though Tehran makes no official confirmation. Reza Pahlavi calls on the world to help oust Iran's Islamic Republic and target Revolutionary Guard leaders. Iran's security forces appear to have suppressed the nationwide protests after more than 3,000 deaths. Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara formally recognizes Kurdish language rights and restores citizenship to all Kurdish Syrians. The decree follows deadly Aleppo clashes that killed 23 and displace over 150,000. Uganda's army denies claims that opposition leader Bobi Wine is abducted by military helicopters after the election. His party maintains he is forcibly removed from his home as authorities reject the allegations. Myanmar's military-backed USDP widens its lead after the second round of voting, official figures have shown. The party is set to win 182 of 330 seats as the election enters its final phase amid conflict. The US Justice Department investigates Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey over alleged obstruction of ICE operations. The probe follows the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent, which triggers protests in Minneapolis. We start this hour in Europe, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has called for NATO to adopt a coordinated strategy for the Arctic region. Speaking in Tokyo, Meloni emphasized the growing strategic importance of the Arctic, especially with melting ice opening up new sea routes and access to valuable resources. She urged NATO allies to avoid fragmented actions and work together to address this emerging issue. Meloni also discussed the political importance of Greenland, particularly in light of tensions between the US and Denmark. While she believes a military intervention by the US over Greenland is unlikely, she stressed the need for greater political commitment from all allies to secure the region. Meloni's comments come as Italy updates its Arctic policy and calls for stronger NATO presence in the area to counter external interference from Russia and China. Let's listen in to her comments.
La NATO ha già scritto nei propri documenti che oggi l'Artico è strategico, quindi sta già rispondendo a una domanda politica di un problema che esiste. Quindi gli alleati stanno ragionando all'interno di questo contesto e io ritengo che il dibattito vada fatto all'interno della NATO anche per cercare di non muoversi in ordine sparso, no? Cioè di dare un senso a quello che si sta facendo. Quindi, ripeto, considero molto difficile un intervento di terra, militare sul tema della Groenlandia. Io credo che la questione sia politica e credo che politicamente verrà risolta. E verrà risolta chiaramente anche, secondo me, anche con un impegno maggiore di tutti gli alleati su un'area che è strategica per tutti, e non lo è solo per gli Stati Uniti, lo è anche per noi, lo è anche per l'Europa, forse non voglio dire di più, ma insomma quasi.
Joining us now to discuss this is Lieutenant Colonel Himanshi Singh. joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this Greenland issue and the Arctic in general is a current flashpoint in NATO relations. However, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization already struggles to stay unified on even the Ukrainian issue. What makes Meloni think the alliance can suddenly coordinate effectively in the Arctic given the current tensions?
Good afternoon, Tom. I think she's making a very, very wise decision by making herself relevant in the current crisis, which is, I think, very, very serious. And when she calls on January 16th for a coordinated NATO presence in the Arctic, it's a masterful diplomatic maneuver designed to solve three problems at once. First of all, it is managing the intra-alliance friction, because President Trump is renewing calls for US control over Greenland and the tensions flaring with Denmark. I think NATO also faces internal crisis. So by inserting Italy in the Mediterranean power into Arctic dialogue, Meloni is trying to attempt a multilateralized dispute. So she's signaling to Washington that while it is a security concern about Russia and China, yet US cannot unilaterally move on Greenland because these moves are unnecessarily. So she is actually effectively positioning Rome as an honest broker between Washington's assertiveness and Brussels' anxiety. Secondly, the industrial angle. You know, the Italian government had signed some papers which are for the shipbuilders. So when the ice melts, I think demand for ice-strengthened hulls and polar logistic vessels will skyrocket, and she's positioning Italians giant like Fincantieri to secure these lucrative contracts. Thirdly is checking the near Arctic rivals. The analysis highlights that the threat of China declaring itself as a near Arctic state, Meloni's strategy is to define that Arctic as a NATO share will have an influence before China can establish a permanent commercial foothold that turns it into a military base, because we know Russia is already there and US has already have its bases. So now she's trying to position NATO and Italy in a better way. Yes, Thomas?
And how do you analyse the diplomacy here? Of course, we've seen multiple different angles that different blocs and international actors have approached this issue. Of course, Denmark has called it a violation of sovereignty. The EU says it sets a dangerous precedent and proof that the US is acting unilaterally. And NATO has said that Article 5 would not apply to an external attacker. But of course, there'd be major tensions behind the scenes. We also saw that statement from European countries outside of the European Union, the United Kingdom, France, among others, urging the United States not to do this, not to fulfill Donald Trump's plan of the annexation of Greenland. Meloni's approach here, more calm, less direct, more unifying. How does this fees in terms of the different approaches that are being used?
See, we cannot deny that NATO has to have its presence in Greenland, because it has been there for ages. And now this new scrambling of Greenland will lead to a lot of crisis. So this approach, she knows that, we cannot leave Greenland alone. And if there is a vacuum by NATO, it will lead to crisis. So if NATO does not show a unified front or not, then two things will happen. First of all, Russia will expand its military base, and US will also be compelled to act unilaterally to secure its gap. So by putting NATO in the middle, she buys security for US and sovereignty for Denmark, because this is how a wise diplomatic leadership behaves. It is not the police presence to prevent a turf war. It is about energy, trade routes, and northern sea routes. It will be used to cut the sea route and timing. So she knows that Arctic holds 30% of the gas in Greenland. So somehow I think she is being very, very wise by supporting this, because NATO is reacting. It is not provoking. So
Okay.
Russia has already militarized Arctic, and absence of NATO strategy will create a security vacuum, which she is trying to fulfill.
Okay, do stay with us as we move on to our next update. And in Washington, Reza Pahlavi, Iran's exiled crown prince, discussed India-Iran relations and future cooperation during a recent news conference. He highlighted the long-standing historical and cultural ties between the two nations, recalling former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's visit to Iran. Pahlavi emphasized that a democratic Iran would seek partnerships with countries that value sovereignty and liberty, with India being a neutral ally due to its expertise in technology, renewable energy and IT. Pahlavi expressed hope that once Iran is free, a new chapter of coordination with India would begin. He also supported the ongoing anti-government protests in Iran, which started over economic distress and have expanded into calls for political change and the end of the theocratic system. Of course, we are once again joined by Lieutenant Himanshi. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the ousted Shah of 1979, he spent most of his life growing up in the United States, but hasn't stopped advocating for a secular and democratic Iran. But he does have no formal political base inside of the country. How realistic is his claim of shaping Iran's future in the way that he speaks about it?
Thomas, in view of the ongoing crisis in Iran, somebody has to fill in the gap once it is created, because the kind of unrest we see in Iran, most probably this Khamenei government will collapse. So when Reza Pahlavi, he reaches out in a press conference to India, I think he's looking for a legitimacy in global south. And this kind of meet, and the press conference, it gives a signal to the world that he is ready to take on the regime once the US interferes or the thing collapses. But the most beautiful thing that has happened for my country is that India has invested heavily in Iran, in Chabahar port. So once, if he comes into power, though we have very good relations with the Iran government as of now also. So any government which comes in place of this government, and if a signal like this is given as per the Cyprus Accord, which happened in pre-1979 history, it's a welcome change, because what he's trying to show that the relationship is civilizational rather than just a transactional. So he's trying to align himself by India's desire for the global and regional stability and counter terrorism. So what he's trying to say to India is that let's have a very peaceful governance in Iran. And it's a welcome thing if he comes to, because India is already facing a lot of challenges in terms of energy. So if any government or future government is trying to give this kind of assurance, it's a welcome change for India.
Of course, just very briefly, India does still continue trade with Iran. From the year 24 to 25, roughly 1.6 to 1.7 billion traded between both of the countries. Donald Trump, of course, has announced an additional 25% tariff on countries who do, in fact, still maintain trade with Iran. Are you concerned that India is going to get hit with another tertiary US tariff from the Trump administration?
You're right. It's a very beautiful question, Thomas, because any tariff which is beyond 15 to 20%, after that you put 25, 50, 100, 500, the business becomes unfeasible. So if the Trump government, it puts any tariff beyond 15%, as it is, India is going to struggle. So if we continue to do trade with Iran, we are going to pay 75% tariff, which is very, very bad. So when he is trying to speak to the Indian government directly. It's a pure strategy. He's speaking directly to Indian leadership in Psyche by invoking Asian connections. He's trying to say that, okay, fine, it is not a 47-year-old interruption. Our relationship goes back to ages. So when earlier also we used to have trade with Iran. So this kind of dialogue is a game changer when India is badly being hit by the power crisis, the energy crisis, and the tariffs altogether, because a major share comes from Iran, and India is a big country. So to run the democratic country like India, I think this kind of thing is a welcome change. Otherwise, India is going to face severe economic crisis, which we already see by the costs of barrels going up. So let's see if Pahlavi is positioning himself as Plan B. If India won't reply back to him openly tomorrow, but in future, I think if he comes to government, then we can have better ties with him.
Indeed.
So it is basically hedging.
Lieutenant Colonel Himanshi Singh, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. We now move on over to the Middle East, and reports in Syria suggest that 2 soldiers were killed in attacks by the Kurdish forces. This comes as Syria's army has announced that it has taken control of the town of Deir Hafa, located east of Aleppo. This came after Kurdish forces agreed to withdraw from the area following recent clashes. Reports say that the Syrian army has established full military control over Deir Hafa, with troops heavily deployed inside the town. Meanwhile, Syria's Kurdish community has expressed dissatisfaction with a presidential decree issued by President Ahmed al-Shara. The decree, which recognizes Kurdish rights and designates Kurdish as an official language, was still welcomed as a first step. But Kurdish leaders said that it did not meet their expectations. Moreover, the Kurdish administration in northern and northeastern Syria has stressed that rights should be safeguarded through permanent constitutional reforms and not temporary decrees. Additionally, in an effort to address the escalating situation, US Envoy to Syria Tom Barak is set to meet with Mazloum Abdi, the general commander of the Syrian Democratic Forces in Erbil. This high-level meeting is part of Washington's renewed diplomatic efforts to prevent further military escalation in northern and eastern Syria. Joining us now to discuss this situation in Syria is Mati Zaweg. He is a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, the situation in Syria remains volatile, especially in that Aleppo region. If these Kurdish forces agreed to withdraw, why were Syrian soldiers still killed? Who's actually controlling these fighters on the ground?
Well, Thomas, thank you for having me. As you know, and you say it very good, the situation is volatile. And when you say the situation is volatile, it means that the breaching the agreements from both sides is something that is common. I mean, the army was taking full control of the city of Aleppo and the surroundings. And let's not forget that we are talking not about the SDF deployed in Aleppo itself, but about 45 to 50 kilometers east for Aleppo in places like Deir Hafa and Maskana. And they were redeploying from there to the other side of River Euphrates to the east. And the question is not the geographical question or the redeployment. The question is why you have several armies inside Syria and what they fear that the central government are not keen to unite really the country, but by the throw arms and throw weapons to make have a vision of a fully controlled Syria from the central government, which is basically Muslim Sunni and with jihadist roots. And this is the biggest fear, and the facts have been that they are trying to slaughter Kurdish, Druze, Christians, and of course Alawis, And now what is happening is that the al-Shara saw that he has no alternative but to be aligned with the vision of Trump, which means take care of all your country, but don't slaughter everybody. That's what's going on. I mean, because some elements in the central government, they have still jihadist point of view. And now the Kurdish are trying to defend themselves and to get some opinions from the central government, like you are our brothers, you can use your language, but let's weaken you until further notice. And this is not a good perspective for the future, but for now, this is working for the alignment of Syria with the West and with the United States, especially that they are trying constantly to take out, and successfully by now, from Russia and Iran in the area. And that's what we have today. What you say about Masloum Abdi, he's called really Masloum Kobani because he's from the area of Kobani. And the Kurdish, of course, are trying to defend what they think is the base of the Kurdish culture and areas in Syria to be prepared also for further developments in the future.
And of course, Matti, we've just passed about a year and a month of a Syria without Bashar al-Assad. Of course, Ahmed al-Shara has the extremely complicated job of pulling Syria together, restoring sovereignty. Of course, the Kurdish situation is extremely complicated. However, what we have seen today is designating Kurdish as an official language now. We've seen individuals, Syrian Kurds, being given or promised citizenship, which was previously stripped from them in 1962. However, Kurdish leaders are still unhappy. What is missing from this, and what's wrong with these actions that al-Shara has put forward?
What is missing is the feeling of not only the Kurdish, all the minorities, that the central government has a truly will of uniting all Syria as it was known in the past with the former borders, because still all the borders have not been achieved from before 2011. And that they are going to respect all minorities in a kind of federal country or a fully integrated country. I think it's a process. The central government not only has to declare that you are my brother, they also have to show it, integrating all minorities in an equality way, and then everything is going to be fine. But this is not what is happening now, so they are unhappy, as the Druze are unhappy that Israel is going to do some security agreement with the central government of Syria. Maybe they are going to be exposed again to slaughtering. So the central government must show that they really want integration. Until this happens, the situation is going to be volatile and everybody is going to be unhappy.
Matti Zaweg, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We now move on to our next story, and India is in active discussions with the US to extend the sanctions waiver for Chabahar port, set to expire in April of 2026. The port, a key part of India's regional strategy, offers crucial access to Afghanistan and Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan. Amid the ongoing Iran crisis, India is exploring options to reduce its exposure, including transferring its investment of $120 million or forming a new entity to manage the project. The Ministry of External Affairs has confirmed that India is committed to ensuring the continuity of the port's operations. Although India's trade with Iran remains limited, the country continues to prioritize its involvement in Chabahar due to its strategic importance in the international north-south transport corridor. Argentina will be launching its microsatellite into space along with NASA's Artemis II mission to the moon. The satellite is called ARGENTINE and is helping to test important technologies needed for future space missions. Its goals include measuring radiation in deep space, testing space-ready components, collecting GPS data in high Earth orbits and checking long-distance communication systems. The data it gathers is going to be very useful for NASA as it plans new exploration missions. Since Artemis II is a crewed mission, it follows some of the strictest safety and quality standards in the world. Because of this, choosing an Argentine satellite for the mission shows strong trust in Argentina's technical, scientific and operational abilities in the space field. Argentina's role in Artemis II is also strengthening its partnership with the United States and other major space agencies. At the same time, it highlights the country's focus on knowledge, innovation and working with the world through skill and merit. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.